through, but it's not. The first section of the Íqán is about 1/3 of the way through. So I'm hoping in the next 6 or 7 weeks we'll finish the whole thing. And I'm trying to abridge it. So when you see the slides, you're not getting everything in the Íqán. I'm cutting probably 25% or more out of it. But I want you to know what I'm doing with it. So the first part of it, remember, this is written for the devoted uncle of the Bab, who is totally brokenhearted and confused as to what happened to the Bab, his wonderful nephew. He has not yet accepted his nephew's station as a manifestation of God. He knew his nephew was exceptional, but he doesn't understand. He's trying to put it all together with his understanding of Islam. So this is also, even though the Íqán uses a lot of Christian quotations, it draws heavily from the Quran. So some of the sections that we're going to leave out tonight are where Baha'u'llah gets into particular Muslim arguments to help the uncle of the Bab that I feel are probably less relevant to the rest of you. I'm hoping that all of you are also reading the Íqán on your own, and hopefully you will read it many, many times during your life. When I was on pilgrimage the first time back in 1981, Mr. Furitan was sitting around the pilgrim house one evening before the evening talk and just chatting informally with the pilgrims. And he was talking about how some American pilgrim had come, he had brought up the book, Some Answered Questions. And the pilgrim said, oh, yes, they'd read it once. He said, once? He said he had read it at least 200 times. And he said it was what kept him from becoming a communist when he was studying at Moscow University. So we need to be reading books like the Íqán many, many times over the course of a lifetime, and you'll get new levels out of it. But the first part of the Kitáb-i-Íqán that we are going to finish up, hopefully in the next 40 minutes or so, Baha'u'llah is giving us keys. He's explaining terminology that's used over and over, and not just in the Quran, but in the Bible, that talks about the coming manifestations of God. And in the process, he's giving us a very intriguing and in-depth understanding of who these people are, who these messengers of God are. And so these are keys that will unlock scripture for you. When we get to the second part, which I hope we'll be able to start tonight, he's going to shift. He's going to continue to give us some explanation of scripture and terms in scripture, but he's going to start talking about the Gayam. And how do we know the Bab is who he says he is? I am the promised one. I am the one who you for 1,000 years have waited. I'm trying to paraphrase that famous response of the Bab during his trial. So let us now get started. And Kimia, you still on there, dear?
Yeah.
Could you read the first 2 slides, please?
Yeah. It is evident that the changes brought about in every dispensation constitute the dark clouds that intervene between the eye of man's understanding and the divine luminary, which shineth forth from the dayspring of the divine essence. Consider how men for generations have been blindly imitating their fathers, and have been trained according to such ways and manners as have been laid down by the dictates of their faith. Were these men therefore to discover suddenly that a man who hath been living in their midst, who with respect to every Human limitation hath been their equal, had risen to abolish every established principle imposed by their faith, principles by which for centuries they have been disciplined, and every opposer and denier of which they have come to regard as infidel,
Profligate.
profligate, and wicked. They would of a certainty be veiled and hindered from acknowledging his truth. Such things are as clouds that veil the eyes of those whose inner being hath not tasted the salsabil of detachment, nor drunk from the cawthor of the knowledge of God. Such men, when acquainted with these circumstances, become so veiled that without the least question they pronounce the manifestation of God an infidel and sentence him to death. You must have heard of such things taking place all down the ages, and are now observing them in these days.
Cathar is a river in heaven, apparently, according to Islam, or it's an image of a river in heaven. So, what are some of the dark clouds that intervene between the eye of man's understanding and the messenger of God for this day? What are some of the things that people don't like about the message of Baha'u'llah?
All the rules and regulations.
Definitely. Definitely. Yes.
Yeah, like no drinking,
Right.
marital sex.
Right. Those are some of the very big dark clouds that intervene between the eyes of men's understanding and the divine luminary. Let me just say, when I found the faith when I was 19 and enrolled about 6 weeks after I first heard about it. And at the time, particularly the drinking laws bothered me because I was a college student. I didn't do drugs, but I did enjoy alcohol. And I always prided myself on being able to control my drinking. I usually stopped after 2 drinks. I'm a little person, so it didn't take much for it to start having an effect on me. So I thought that I controlled alcohol, that it did not control me. But I realized if it was making me hesitate to accept a religion, then alcohol did control me. What's one of the 2 biggest dark clouds that intervene between people today and Baha'u'llah? There are 2 that I hear over and over again talking to Baha'is all over the United States.
I think one of the big ones now in the United States is kind of the stance of like LGBTQ, like
Yes.
gay marriage and things like that. I think
Yeah.
it's going to continue to become a source of contention.
Right.
And thank you for sharing about the drinking. I always find that like such an interesting question. I had an uncle who was a British gentleman who was like, you know, especially like for the British who married this Persian woman in the 50s who
Yeah.
became high, and like for a British person to like stop drinking, it was such a huge thing. And similarly, where it was like that was the one thing that kept him back. And then he shared a story about like how he was asking people, and then similarly like it was like if that was the one thing holding you back, then that's not worth it from that standpoint.
Yeah. It's hard. It's hard, as you all know, to not be a drinker and or using drugs or having sex outside of marriage when you're young and you're involved in a normal social milieu. When I was coming along in college, the no sex outside of marriage was a little easier to deal with because the dating morality wasn't what it is today. But the LGBT thing is a huge issue for the faith. And we're not going to change. Our teachings on it are not going anywhere. A lot of other religious groups are changing, but we're not going to. It's only the next manifestation of God can change it, because it's based on the Guardian's interpretation of a statement of Baha'u'llah. So we can't, the House of Justice can't change anything about that. The other thing that we hear quite frequently is the no women on the House of Justice. We have no idea why that's the case. I mean, that's a mystery. So that's a test for Baha'is, not just for the non-Baha'is, right? So when we start thinking about these things as dark clouds that intervene between our understanding of the message of a manifestation, for me, that makes it a little easier to accept them.
I was gonna say a tradition also, like a lot of people hold on to their past traditions.
Yes.
Like if they're born in a Christian family, they stay Christian, or Jewish, or Muslim. Basically, what their parents are, that's what their religion is.
And that's hard because, you know, I loved celebrating Christmas when I was a kid. It was very important to me growing up before I was a Baha'i. And all the other aspects of being connected to whatever family traditions that you have. So yeah, it's hard. Imam, can you read the next two for me?
Yes. It behooveth us, therefore, to make the utmost endeavor that by God's invisible assistance, these dark veils, these clouds of heaven-sent trials, may not hinder us from beholding the beauty of his shining countenance, and that we may recognize him only by his own self. And should we ask for a testimony of his truth, we should content ourselves with one, and only one, that thereby we may attain unto him who is the fountainhead of infinite grace, and on whose presence all the world's abundance fadeth into nothingness, that we may cease to cavil at him every day, and to cleave unto our own idle fancy. He saith, on the day when the heaven shall give out a palpable smoke, which shall enshroud mankind, this will be an afflictive torment. The all-glorious hath decreed these very things that are contrary to the desires of wicked men, to be the touchstone and standard whereby he proveth his servants, that the just may be known from the wicked, and the faithful distinguished from the infidel.
Any thoughts on these two?
Is the second one is that a Bible verse or?
I think that is a from the Quran. Let's see. Quran 44:10.
Oh, okay, all right. Thank you.
So we make an endeavor so that God's invisible assistance will remove these dark veils, these clouds of heaven-sent trials. So even these issues, you know, the laws and all the other issues, these are heaven-sent to keep them from hindering us from beholding Baha'u'llah. We should concern ourselves with one and only one proof. And now let's go on to palatable smoke to see what he says about smoke. So, Sarush, could you read the next two, please?
I think we had a question,
Oh,
possibly.
okay, oh, sure. Okay, I didn't see that. All right. Yes.
Not anymore. Not anymore. I lowered it.
Oh, okay.
Did you have a question, Shaheen?
I had one, but apparently it's going to be defined.
Okay, so now we know. Okay, here we go. All right. So Sarush,
Okay.
so that
So
yeah, here we go.
yeah, I think this is in regards to the palpable smoke, right, from the
Right,
previous
right.
quotation. Okay. The symbolic term smoke denotes grave dissensions, the abrogation and demolition of recognized standards, and the utter destruction of their narrow-minded exponents. What smoke more dense and overpowering than the one which hath now enshrouded all the peoples of the world, which hath become a torment unto them, and from which they hopelessly fail to deliver themselves, however much they strive. So fierce is this fire of self-burning within them, that at every moment they seem to be afflicted with fresh torments. The more they are told that this wondrous cause of God, this revelation from the Most High, hath been made manifest to all mankind, and is waxing greater and stronger every day, the fiercer groweth the blaze of the fire in their hearts. Ere long, thine eyes will behold the standards of divine power unfurled throughout all regions, and the signs of his triumphant might and sovereignty manifest in every land. As most of the divines have failed to apprehend the meaning of these verses, and have not grasped the significance of the day of resurrection, they therefore have foolishly interpreted these verses according to their idle and faulty conception. The one true God is my witness. Little perception is required to enable them to gather from the symbolic language of these two verses all that we have purposed to propound, and thus to attain, through the grace of the All-Merciful, the resplendent morn of certitude.
So when we have a messenger of God who comes and gives a message that the world doesn't want to hear because they don't like it, this is the smoke. Recognize standards. Right now, much of the world recognizes standards that we don't agree with. For example, I saw some person who's a Baha'i posting. There was a controversy about the Michelangelo statue of David, which, as we know, is a full male nude, being shown to school children. And there were parents who objected to that. And this was seen as by many people as unwarranted censorship because, hey, it's a piece of art by Michelangelo. I suspect, though, if we had Abdu'l-Baha and asked him about a beautiful statue of a full nude that's quite explicit, he might not have the same approach to it that we in the 21st century, thinking that we're very liberal and enlightened about such things, how we would see it, whether he would see it the same way. The standards the Baha'i faith have, particularly with regard to morality. Think about it when you're watching a movie or watching a TV show. Would you be embarrassed if Shoghi Effendi or Abdu'l-Baha were sitting next to you on the sofa watching the same show with you? Would there be things that you would go, well, gee, I'm sorry, I guess we really shouldn't have this on? This is the smoke. All these standards that we have that are quite different. And one of the standards that we don't think about, because we don't talk about it a whole lot, is the idea that for not only a world government, but a world theocracy. Because we know that in the end, the Baha'i administrative order is going to be the administrative order of the world. If you want to scare people, talk about that. they will run the other way, even more than they do for the other reasons that they do at the moment. So this is that smoke that's out there, that's so fierce is this fire of self burning within them, that at every moment they seem to be afflicted with fresh torments. The more they are told that this wondrous cause of God hath been made manifest, and is waxing greater and stronger, the fiercer groweth the blaze of the fire in their hearts. However, he assures us that the faith is going to triumph. Any thoughts, comments?
I feel like that's such interesting, because that is, I remember going to an event once in Colorado given by a gay Baha'i. And like sometimes there's people who like just ignore it, right? That, oh, there's no Baha'is that are, you know what I mean? I think there's the difference that like people can identify in a lot of different ways and can also find themselves identifying as Baha'i and have a love for Baha'u'llah. And then like what actions are allowed, or if you're trying to live within the teachings of the Baha'i faith, what does that look like? And then what's the role of the other Baha'is in that community to pass judgment or not pass judgment, or what is our approach about it? And that talk was a lot about like the number one thing is that we approach people with love and kindness. And our role is not to judge and not to be the police or any, that's not our space. That's not our place to do that. And in my head, I think I've always reconciled where it's like, yeah, people, LGBTQ, especially I feel like that even of itself is its own huge spectrum. Like someone who is trans, who is transitioning is very different, living a very different lived experience than someone who identifies as gay and wants to get married is two men who want to get, that's two different situations, you know, two different things. And so even within that, I think there's so much nuance, but then I think one way I've always reconciled it was like, well, in the Baha'i faith, it wouldn't be a Baha'i marriage. Like, but I have no issue with like two gay men having us like in the government getting married. I have no problem with that. Like, what's it to me? That doesn't, I don't think that's like wrong, but yeah, I don't know what the reconciling of that is.
Well, you know, one of the things that, by the way, I worked many years for the Office of Community Administration at the National Center, in addition to working 18 years at the World Center. But what we did in the Office of Community Administration is the office that deals with Baha'i law. It's like being on a super assembly 40 hours a week, dealing with all the problems of the Baha'i community. And one of the things that I came to understand from working intensely in Baha'i law is that the laws are there for our own spiritual development. And when a person goes against a Baha'i law, whether they're a Baha'i or not, they are moving themselves further away from God. They're going against their whole purpose for being, which is to develop their soul and to move closer to God. So when I see two people getting married in a gay marriage or living together and without marriage, I really feel bad for them. It breaks my heart, because what it means is that they are very publicly moving away from God and they're not ruining their souls, they're hurting their soul's development by doing that. And so I can't celebrate their marriage, not because I'm passing judgment, but because I feel bad for them. How can I celebrate something that I know as a Baha'i is hurting them? So, you know, this is it. But one of the things that you should know is that we have, I can think of 4 or 5 people right off who are very clear that their sexual orientation is homosexual, but they are very good Baha'is. They're very firm in the faith. They have just chosen celibacy because they know that that's the only thing that they can do under that situation. And my admiration for them is through the roof because they have taken that harder path. And, you know, Baha'is are not saying that gay people can't get married. We're just saying you have to marry a member of the opposite sex. And there are a number of gay people who have entered into heterosexual marriages and been very happy. It may not have been their first choice, but we often don't get to marry, or sometimes we don't get to marry our first choice. But that doesn't mean they still can't have a fulfilling life, even if they're not dealing with their first choice of a mate. So anyway, when, you know, the same is true. I see it the same way with people using drugs and alcohol and so forth. I just know, we know that they're hurting themselves. And so I feel bad for them. You know, so anyway, does that make sense? It's not fun because we all want to be, oh, you know, we're not prejudiced, we love everybody, but we have standards. And when we see someone going off of those standards, our goal really has to be to help them get back on the path. And we don't get back on the path by celebrating them doing something this hurtful. So, you know, it's the House of Justice has left it up to us, for example, when we get an invitation to a gay marriage as to whether to attend that ceremony or not. But how can I be happy about someone doing something that's harmful? You know, so I would have it, it would be a big test for me to attend a gay marriage.
Does it say anywhere like the reasons why it is harmful? Or it just says generally it's not right?
Well, the statement that's being interpreted by Shoghi Effendi used a particular word in Persian from the Baha'u'llah used a particular word that referred to the practice in the Middle East of older men sexually molesting young boys. And that's the particular word that was used. And he said it's so bad he can't even talk about it. And Shoghi Effendi, in his role as interpreter, said that that particular statement is, in essence, Baha'u'llah saying that homosexual relations are not acceptable in the Baha'i faith. Now, it doesn't mean that two consenting adults having a homosexual relationship are doing something so bad you can't speak about it, because it's not the same as a boy being exploited by an adult, which is the particular instance that Baha'u'llah is speaking about. But we know that Abdul Baha, when he was in the United States, said he had a way of judging a person. And the rods he used to judge was obedience. So how obedient are we to the standards in the writings? You know, we like to look at Advent of Divine Justice because we love going to that very small 4 pages or so that deal with the most vital and challenging issue, the race issue, right? In fact, if you ask the average Baha'i, what is the Advent of Divine Justice about? They would say it's about racism. Well, it's an 80-some page book. Only 4 pages or so deal with that. He gives equal space to morality. And what the Guardian says in Advent of Divine Justice about morals, particularly in the West, is if you really take it to heart, it's pretty stiff. You know, we're Puritans. You know, we have very, very high moral standards. And this is how we are going to have a better society. I can tell you, as someone who's been a legal aid attorney, if we could get people to wait until they were married to start having children, we would solve, and to not drink or use drugs, we would solve 80% of the social problems in the world. Children would grow up in happy, functional families. If we did those three things as a society, we would solve all kinds of problems. So as someone who spent most of my life dealing with family problems professionally, but everyone says, oh, well, you know, that's not me you're talking about. That's that person over there who's got the problem. Anyway, I don't want to give a lecture, but this faith, as Rihya Kanum used to say, it has teeth in it. You know, this is not a wishy-washy thing. And Baha'u'llah is telling us that people are not going to like what he says. They're not going to like what the Bab says. The Bab, by the way, actually went so far as to ban smoking tobacco and eating onions. Did you know the Bab banned eating onions? Because when he who God shall make manifest comes, you didn't want to have onions on your breath, right? Fortunately.
What about garlic? Did he ban garlic too?
Probably, but
I think it's onions and garlic. Yeah.
yeah, the Persians don't eat a lot of garlic, right?
Depends. Depends on what part of Iran you're from.
Yeah. So anyway, yeah.
I want to say something real quick that
Yes.
about like Baha'is, and in a sense we're Puritans. Yeah, and I think that's a good thing. And I also would like to add that, however, the bounty of being recognizing this dispensation is that the Baha'u'llah has laid out all the tools when applied, when parents applied, you know, learn them and apply it to their children, to allow them to, you know, be mature by the age of 15. And 15 and up, you're actually, you know, you can get married. So
Right.
maybe you don't get married at 15 right away, but you know, when you are 18, 19 or whatever, and you have that much level of maturity that maybe even some 40-year-olds don't attain, then you know, you're way ahead of the game.
Right.
And I know a family that their son is, I'm not sure how old he is, but he's an architecture student at Berkeley, and he's Baha'i, and he's married, and I think he can't be no more than 19 or 20 right now, you know?
Yeah. Yeah.
So they did it right. Like, that's amazing. We're the ones who are suffering because we are delayed in many aspects of our lives, and nobody, and society itself doesn't care because that's not their standard anyway, but we're the ones who are suffering right now.
Well, in the parental consent law, everybody loves it as long as the parents say yes. But when they say no, then the whole community wants to jump on the parents and say, oh, but they're in love. Why don't you say yes? And the parental consent law is going to help prevent a lot of mistakes if it's properly applied. But anyways, well, friends, this is a great discussion, and I'm happy to continue it, but I also don't want to get too bogged down. So let's move on. Is that okay? All right. So let's see. Who haven't I picked on lately? Shireen, are you there?
Sorry, I just stepped away to pick up my dinner, but I can.
Are you in a good point to read the next couple of slides, please?
Yeah, sure.
Okay.
Sorry, I just like ran to go get my food.
That's okay. You're allowed.
The holy man Sadig, in his eulogy of the cherubim, saith, there stand a company of our fellow Shias behind the throne. Diverse and manifold are the interpretations of the words behind the throne. In one sense, they indicate that no true Shias exist. Even as he hath said in another passage, a true believer is likened unto the philosopher's stone. Addressing subsequently his listener, he saith, Hast thou ever seen the philosopher's stone? Reflect how this symbolic language, more eloquent than any speech, however direct, testifieth to the non-existence of a true believer. Such is the testimony of Saddig. And now consider how unfair and numerous are those who, although they themselves have failed to inhale the fragrance of belief, have condemned as infidels those by whose word belief itself is recognized and established. Inasmuch as these holy beings have sanctified themselves from every human limitation, they have become endowed with attributes of the spiritual and have been adorned with the noble traits of the blessed. They therefore have been designated as angels.
Oh, okay. I'm sorry. We forgot. Okay, let me read this first one. Concerning his words, and he shall send his angels. By angels is meant those who, reinforced by the power of the Spirit, have consumed with the fire of love, the love of God, all human traits and limitations, and have clothed themselves with the attributes of the most exalted beings and of the cherubim. Then he goes on to talk about this tradition about cherubim, and then one more about angels. So you always wondered what was an angel, and I presume you know the Philosopher's Stone because you've watched Harry Potter movies or read the books, right? So what is a cherubim? Anyone know what these mythical or real creatures are, the cherubim?
According to Google, it's a celestial winged being with human, animal, or bird-like characteristics who functions as a throne bearer of a deity.
So to say that the cherubim, who are the creatures who are so close to God that they are like God's, the creatures God created that are allowed to be, well, we would symbolically say the ones who tend him at his throne. Standing behind the throne indicates that they have great power. But we know nobody stands behind the throne of God. So, in other words, they were using this particular image to say that it's impossible for anyone to, any creation of God, any creature created by God, to get to that point, to be a true believer. Even the cherubim, these exalted beings that are so close to the Creator, are not perfect. None of us are going to be perfect. So even the cherubim, who are far beyond us, are not perfect. And the angels are below the cherubim. So even today, we could have people walking here on earth who are angels. Those who, reinforced by the power of the Spirit, have consumed with the fire of the love of God all human traits and limitations, and have clothed themselves with the attributes of the most exalted beings and of the cherubim. And then he goes on to again say, these holy beings have sanctified themselves from every human limitation, have become endowed with the attributes of the spiritual, and have been adorned with the noble traits of the blessed. They therefore have been designated as angels. Anyone here among you ever seen an angel? You know, there are angel sightings that people have sometimes.
Like
Matthew, you're an
literal.
angel.
Oh, you talk to my family, they'll assure you that that's my horns are there too, you know. Yeah, thank you. Anyway, what were you going to say? Is it who else was speaking up besides Shaheen?
I was gonna ask, what is it? I might have like lost whatever you just said, but just to clarify, angels are like not humans, or humans that are just quote, like perfect.
They are humans who have become, they have so enveloped the message of a messenger of God. I mean, they have so taken on the spiritual that they have sanctified themselves from every human limitation. I think that Abdu'l-Baha probably is as close as we will come to a human being who is an angel.
Yeah.
Probably the greatest holy leaf is a very close second, you know? They're not messengers of God, they're human beings, but they are endowed with the attributes of the spiritual and have been adorned with the noble traits of the blessed. By the way, you know, we talk about saints. Saints are not as high as angels, but the one person that Shoghi Effendi pointed out was a saint was Martha Root. So you can get to know that amazing hand of the cause, and you'll be finding out what it's like to be a saint as a Baha'i.
Do you know any angels?
I've known Baha'is who were developed at a very high level. I've never had a vision where I thought I was seeing an angel. I've had a couple of mystical experiences, but not seeing angels. But there are people who see angels as mystical experiences. You can go on Google and get all kinds of people reporting mystical experiences with angels. So they're there. God sends us lots of signs of the next world. It's fun to read about angels, actually. And there are different kinds of angels, different levels of angels. The angel Gabriel is one of four archangels, Michael, Gabriel, I forget. And it's Gabriel is the one that Muhammad says was how the Holy Spirit would appear to him in the form of the angel Gabriel. Baha'u'llah instead talks about a maiden, seeing a maiden. And he has several different times where he sees a maiden. He talks to us about seeing a maiden. So the maiden would be a form of an angel. You know, not only did he see the maiden in the Sea of Chal, he saw the maiden in the Garden of Rizwan and talks to us about that when he talks about the trustworthiness. So many interesting topics. All right, so let's go on now that we've talked about angels. Let's see. Tajari, I'm not sure how to pronounce your first name. Could you read the next two, please? Or, oh, Aria. I'm looking at your last name. It's covered up. Your Aria is covered up. Thank you.
As the adherents of Jesus have never understood the hidden meaning of these words, and as the signs which they and the leaders of their faith have expected have failed to appear, they therefore refuse to acknowledge even until now the truth of those manifestations of holiness that have, since the days of Jesus, been made manifest. They have thus deprived themselves of the outpourings of God's holy grace and of the wonders of his divine utterance. They have even failed to perceive that were the signs of the manifestation of God in every age to appear in the visible realm, in accordance with the text of established traditions, none could possibly deny or turn away, nor would the blessed be distinguished from the miserable, and the transgressor from the God-fearing. Judge fairly. Were the prophecies recorded in the gospel to be literally fulfilled, were Jesus, son of Mary, accompanied by angels, to descend from the visible heaven upon the clouds, who would dare to disbelieve? Who would dare to reject the truth and wax disdainful? Nay, Such consternation would immediately seize all the dwellers of the earth, that no soul would feel able to utter a word, much less to reject or accept the truth.
Have any of you encountered Christians who really, really, really believe that Jesus is going to descend from the clouds when he comes back with a company of angels with wings and harps and trumpets? Have any of you ever encountered people who actually believe that?
I have.
You know who I have encountered more
Who?
are people that don't believe in God and say that if there was a God that was all powerful and omniscient and almighty, it would be evident and he would have made it clearer to me. And because he hasn't, then he can't possibly be omnipotent and omniscient and all powerful, because he's not willing, or is either not willing or not able to reveal himself to me. And I always come back to this passage in the Íqán because it's so clear that if he were to do that, then it would rid you of your own ability to make decisions. It would rid you of your free will and free choice. You would become a slave.
Right, right. Well, as Baha'u'llah himself said, if God worked that way, if he had Jesus just descend from the clouds with the angels, everybody would accept him. Who wouldn't accept him? Although, Dostoevsky and the brothers Karamazov has a story within that little book of Jesus literally coming back. And the first thing people do is put him in jail. They don't want it. So, but yeah, God doesn't work that way. However, if people start paying attention, they will see confirmations. Those confirmations which alone can change an atom to an eagle, a drop of water into rivers and seas, and an atom into lights and suns, as the prayer for the southern states says. So if you start paying attention, you're going to see weird things happen. And the people who are looking to be head over the head, their eyes aren't open, probably because they don't want to see it. There are too many weird things that happen to people. Dreams and visions and the interesting coincidences that don't seem like coincidences. That if they start paying attention, they will see those signs of God working in this world. But you got to look for them. You all know about the Left Behind books that were really popular about 20 years ago. They made a movie of it. The idea that the rapture, that all of a sudden all the good people would be immediately taken to heaven and everyone else would be left on earth, and suddenly two people in a car would disappear and the other people would still be left in that car. I mean, just strange stuff. That's how literal people get. Good point, Aria, though.
There's also an organization. They actually have a cafe in Westwood. It's called Jews for
Jesus, yeah.
Jews for Jesus, yeah. But they're not actually Jews in any way, shape, or form. They're just like very hardcore Christians who like truly think like anybody who does not think in this way is going to hell and eternal damnation and gonna burn in the fire. Very literally.
Well, to get back to Aria's point, I think a lot of people don't like the idea of a God who judges them. So they would rather there not be a God than a God who would judge them. But then you have these other folks who, we used to have an auxiliary board member who used to laugh about fire insurance. People were scared of hellfire. And so they wanted to know that they were saved, that when they died, they were going to heaven. They weren't going to be punished in any way. because they had believed in Jesus in the right way. And many years ago, when I was in college, we used to carpool between Richmond, where my home was, and the campus, which was 6 hours away. And one time after I'd become a Baha'i, I was in a car full of about 5 or 6 of us heading back to college from winter break. And the driver, I was sitting in the front, and the driver was asking me questions about Baha'i. So we had hours where I could talk about it. And finally, this little small voice in the back seat speaks up and says she couldn't believe that Jesus would come back and not take her. You know, she was part of the Jesus movement that was hitting a lot of college campuses in the 1970s. And she had this idea that Jesus had to come back in such a literal way that she would not miss him when he came back. Well, she got to hear about him. They just had a new name. So let's move on here. Let's see, Hashti, are you there?
Hi, yeah, I'm there. I got invited by Shaheen.
Oh, good. We're glad. So, Hashti, could you read the next 2 slides for me, please?
Sure, of course, yeah. Yeah, okay. These divines who are still doubtful of and dispute about the theological obscurities of their faith, yet claim to be the exponents of the subtleties of the law of God and the expounders of the essential mysteries of his holy word. They confidently assert that such traditions as indicate the advent of the expected Gaim have not yet been fulfilled, whilst they themselves have failed to inhale the fragrance of the meaning of these traditions, and are still oblivious of the fact that all the signs foretold have come to pass, that the way of God's holy cause hath been revealed, and the concourse of the faithful, swift as lightning, are even now passing upon that way, whilst these foolish divines wait expecting to witness the signs foretold. Say, O ye foolish ones, wait ye even as those before you are waiting.
Can you get this next one, please?
Oh yeah. Were they to be questioned concerning those signs that must needs herald the revelation and rise of the son of the Mohammedan dispensation, to which we have already referred, none of which have been literally fulfilled, and were to be said to them, wherefore have ye rejected the claims advanced by Christians and the peoples of other faiths, and regard them as infidels? Knowing not what answer to give, they will reply, these books have been corrupted and are not and never have been of God. Reflect. The words, the verses themselves eloquently testify to the truth that they are of God. A similar verse hath been also revealed in the Quran, were ye of them that comprehend. Verily I say, throughout all this period, they have utterly failed to comprehend what is meant by corrupting the text.
So now Baha'u'llah is going back to the problems the uncle of the Bab is having. Remember, the uncle of the Bab is a very devout Muslim, and he is confused, wondering in what way did his nephew, the Bab, fulfill the prophecies. They didn't seem to be literally fulfilled. And the Muslims had said about the Christians and the fact that Christians had not accepted Muhammad, they said that, oh, it's because the texts themselves of the Old and New Testament, of the traditions, had been corrupted. And Baha'u'llah is now going to go after that particular argument. So let's move on here and read a little bit more. Mateen, can you get the next few of these, please?
Sure. Barely by perverting the text is not meant that which these foolish and abject souls have fancied, even as some maintain that Jewish and Christian divines have effaced from the book such verses as extol and magnify the countenance of Muhammad, and instead thereof have inserted the contrary. How utterly vain and false are these words! Can a man who believeth in a book and deemeth it to be inspired by God mutilate it? Moreover, the Pentateuch had been spread over the surface of the earth and was not confined to Mecca and Medina, so that they could privily corrupt and pervert its text. Nay, rather, by corruption of the text is meant that in which all Muslim divines are engaged today, that is the interpretation of God's holy book in accordance with their idle imaginings and vain desires. He saith, a part of them heard the word of God, and then, after they had understood it, distorted it, and knew that they did so. This verse, too, doth indicate that the meaning of the word of God hath been perverted, not that the actual words have been effaced. To the truth of this testify they that are of sound mind.
Can you keep going, please?
He saith, woe unto those who with their own hands transcribe the book corruptly, and then say, this is from God, that they may sell it for some mean price. This verse was revealed with reference to the divines and leaders of the Jewish faith. These divines, in order to please the rich, acquire worldly emoluments, and give vent to their envy and misbelief. Wrote a number of treatises refuting the claim of Muhammad, supporting their arguments with such evidences as it would be improper to mention, and claimed that these arguments were derived from the text of the Pentateuch. The same may be witnessed today. Consider how abundant are the denunciations written by the foolish divines of this age against this most wondrous cause. How vain their imaginings that these calamities are in conformity with the verses of God's sacred book and in consonance with the utterances of men of discernment. Wow.
So I abridged this section because he gets into quite a lengthy discussion of some Islamic traditions about the corruption of the holy books. And this was one of the charges that Muslims had leveled against Jews and Christians as to why they didn't follow Muhammad. They said, oh, well, they have taken the Bible and they have corrupted it. And Baha'u'llah is saying, first of all, those books have been around for a long time and widely spread around. If suddenly verses had been changed or left out, it would be easy to know that. In fact, the person who transcribes the Pentateuch, does anyone here know what is the Pentateuch? He refers to it a number of times. What's the Pentateuch? Anyone know?
It's the Hebrew Bible, which is, well, let me see. I think it's the first 5 books of the Hebrew Bible. Genesis,
Exactly.
Exodus, Leviticus, Numbers, and Deuteronomy.
Perfect. Thank you. And who supposedly wrote those first 5 books?
Moses?
Exactly. So the Pentateuch is supposed to be the book of Moses. However, the end of Exodus, it says, and Moses died and was buried in a cave, and to this day, nobody knows where he's buried. So that's sort of refutes the idea that he wrote all 5 of those books, if he wrote any of them. But nonetheless, they are the books of Moses, is the Pentateuch. So clearly, they couldn't have been corrupted. In fact, the reason the word for scribe in Hebrew is based on the word for counting, because each book of the Old Testament, of the Pentateuch, has this particular number of Hebrew letters of the alphabet in it. And they count every single letter after they have transcribed it to make sure they didn't leave anything out. So they use counting as a method of preventing this from happening. So what is he saying is a true corruption? It's not the actual words, it's people misinterpreting it deliberately. And this is not by the book itself, but by the so-called learned treatises of religious scholars. And he said the same was going on in his time with the words of the Bab. So, Shaheen, can you get the next couple of them for me, please?
Sure. Our purpose in relating these things is to warn you that were they to maintain that those verses wherein the signs referred to in the gospel are mentioned have been perverted, were they to reject them and cling instead to other verses and traditions, you should know that their words were utter falsehood and sheer calumny. Yea, corruption of the text in the sense we have referred to, hath been actually effected in particular instances. A few of these we have mentioned, that it may become manifest to every discerning observer that unto a few untutored holy men hath been given the mastery of human learning, so that the malevolent opposer may cease to contend that a certain verse doth indicate corruption of the text, and insinuate that we, through lack of knowledge, have made mention of such things. We have also heard a number of the foolish of the earth assert that the genuine text of the heavenly gospel doth not exist amongst the Christians, that it hath ascended unto heaven. How grievously they have erred, how oblivious of the fact that such a statement imputeth the gravest injustice and tyranny to a gracious and loving providence. How could God, when once the day star of the beauty of Jesus had disappeared from the sight of his people and ascended unto the fourth heaven, cause his holy book, his most great testimony amongst his creatures, to disappear also?
Can you get this next, please?
What would be left to that people to cling to from the setting of the day star of Jesus until the rise of the Son of Muhammad and dispensation? What law could be their stay and guide? How could such people be made the victims of the avenging wrath of God, the omnipotent avenger? How could they be afflicted with the scourge of chastisement by the heavenly King? Above all, how could the flow of the grace of the All-Bountiful be stayed? How could the ocean of his tender mercies be stilled? We take refuge with God from that which his creatures have fancied about him. Exalted is he above their comprehension.
Thank you. Any immediate thoughts on those these passages? So on this first slide, he basically says the manifestations of God and their entourages, he refers to as a few untutored holy men, hath been given the mastery of human learning, so that the malevolent opposer may cease to contend that a certain verse doth indicate corruption of the text, and insinuate that we, through lack of knowledge, have made mention of such things. My understanding of this sentence here is he is saying the messengers of God do not get their knowledge from attending a university. They're usually either illiterate or they're untutored, which means they haven't had a lot of formal education. So how could these people, these manifestations of God, who in the earthly sense do not have a lot of formal education, how could they possibly be accused of perverting the text? They're not educated in the way that one would be to go in and mess with scripture, except to be revealing new scripture. But the old scripture, this is not their thing. And then to say in the case of Jesus, who didn't write anything, that God didn't leave us a good text to give us testimony as to his ministry, he said that wouldn't be fair. How could God do that? That would have been a grave injustice if the New Testament wasn't a faithful rendition of his ministry. How could he hold mankind accountable for Jesus's teachings if we didn't have a book? Now, you may have noticed something interesting in here. It's a minor point. Jesus, when once the day star, the beauty of Jesus, had disappeared from the sight of his people and ascended unto the fourth heaven. Jesus ascended unto the fourth heaven. Anyone have an idea what that means? I had to look it up today. In Islam, there are 7 levels of heaven. And the fourth heaven is also where that divine lot tree is, the boundary between this world and the next. And so he's referring to Jesus in the next world as going to the fourth heaven level. There's some interesting articles on the levels of heaven in Islam you can find on the internet. Any thoughts or whatever? We're going to wrap it up here in a second. Okay, let's see. Kimia, are you still there?
Yes.
Could I ask you to read the next 2, please?
Yes. Dear friend, now when the light of God's everlasting morn is breaking, when the radiance of his holy words, God is the light of the heavens and of the earth, is shedding illumination upon all mankind, when the inviolability of his tabernacle is being proclaimed by his sacred utterance, God hath willed to perfect his light, and the hand of omnipotence bearing his testimony. In his grasp he holdeth the kingdom of all things, is being outstretched unto all the peoples and kindreds of the earth. It behooveth us to gird up the loins of endeavor, that haply by the grace and bounty of God we may enter the celestial city. Verily we are God's, and abide within the exalted habitation, and unto him we do return. It is incumbent upon thee, by the permission of God, to cleanse the eye of thine heart from the things of the world, that thou mayest realize the infinitude of divine knowledge, and mayest behold truth so clearly that thou wilt need no proof to demonstrate his reality, nor any evidence to bear witness unto his testimony.
Thank you. Any thoughts on this? This is sort of his benediction to the uncle of the Bab at the ending of the first section of the Íqán. I know we've been going through very rich material tonight, but I thought this was interesting. It is incumbent upon thee by the permission of God to cleanse the eye of thine heart. So God has to help you out and give you permission to cleanse your heart. And if you cleanse your heart, then you can behold the truth so clearly that thou wilt need no proof to demonstrate his reality. This is for Arya's friends who are not sure whether they believe in God or actually atheists.
That's what they mean when they say cleanse thine heart, is to get rid of all doubt or to kind of like purify your past mistakes.
Thy heart from the things of the world. So it means detachment. It doesn't mean being perfect. It means detaching from the world. See, it says to cleanse the eye of thine heart from the things of the world. And one of the things that Baha'u'llah constantly warns us is to not judge God and his religions by earthly standards. So we have to try to get into an understanding of what is the will of God and to see things, try to understand things with God's eyes. That's difficult. To cleanse the eye of thine heart from the things of the world. And then you can realize the infinitude, how vast divine knowledge is, the infinitude of divine knowledge, and mayest behold truth so clearly that thou wilt need no proof to demonstrate his reality, nor any evidence to bear witness unto his testimony.
But first you need permission.
But first you need permission. Yes.
So how does that exactly, what does that look like?
I don't know. Any thoughts on that? How do you get God's permission to cleanse your heart from the things of this world?
I don't think even that same understanding of permission is the same, in the sense of like, oh, I need to ask for permission. I think it's just like, if, again, this whole time we're reading about how I kind of get the sense that human beings suck, and that and that like we're prone to mistakes and we're prone to not understand things,
Right.
and we're prone to misinterpret things. And that if we're lucky, that maybe the conditions that we're in will allow us to have the ability to have the epiphany, or just like the eye to see what these things actually mean, or what these things actually are, why they are the way they are, or why, just have that wisdom kind of be brought to our forefront in like consciousness, rather than and it become elucidated and clear for us to understand by that. So not even just like the idea of like, oh, I need to get permission, like I need to get the permission slip signed and I got to do whatever I got to do to get, like, I don't even think it's that way, but maybe I'm wrong. I don't know.
I was thinking of it more like the permission is the doors that allow you to see everything, and it to be easier for you to go along this path, like less resistance. So I don't know, either through like, maybe that looks like through prayer, through the just like desire, wanting it, and taking action in those steps. And eventually, like you said, if you're lucky enough, that door will open metaphorically. And then you'll just start to see things differently.
I think both of you had good insights. And I think prayer is one of the ways we ask God to help us to achieve this spiritual level. And sometimes he will help us by sending us tests. Sometimes he will give us insight or give us an experience that will give us the insight.
Yeah.
There's a story about Ali Quli Khan as a young man, when he was probably in his early 20s. He had said to Abdul Baha that he didn't really understand what it was for the soul to go to the next world. And Abdul Baha said, well, pray about it and you will come to understand this. And one day when he was here living in the United States, he was sitting at a harbor and watched a boat set sail and sail out of the harbor and then sail out into the ocean. And the ship, of course, became smaller and smaller and smaller, and then it disappeared over the horizon. And it suddenly hit him that that's what happens when a person dies. It's not that they aren't still there. It's just that we couldn't see them anymore. So just as he knew that that ship was still out there, he just couldn't see it because it had gone over the horizon. So that was the insight he needed for that question he had.
Is that written anywhere?
Yeah, it's in one of his daughter's books, Summing Up Remembrance. Let's see, she wrote 2 books about her father. I don't remember. It's probably in the first one that deals with his youth. So Marcia Gale's books on her father, Ali Cooley Khan.
Can you repeat what you said about it, the story? I kind of want to just take notes on what you said.
Well, he was having trouble understanding what it means for a soul to go to the next world. And Abdu'l-Baha had assured him, because he had spent time in the Holy Land before he was sent to the United States. He was sent here in the early about 1904 or 3 to serve Mirza Abul Fadl when he was sent here by Abdu'l-Baha. So he was sitting one day at a harbor, at a dock, at a harbor, where he watched a boat sail away, a ship sail away. And he realized, as he watched this ship go out of the harbor and then into the ocean and then out of sight as it went over the horizon, that the soul going to the next world was very much the same way. The soul is still out there, just like that ship was still out there. He just couldn't see it anymore because it was over the horizon. And that answered the questions in his heart about the nature of death, that aspect of death. So Abdu'l-Baha had promised him that he would come to have his question answered, and that was how it was answered. There's an interesting, if you've read the new book, new compilation of Light to the World, I think it is, of New Letters of Abdu'l-Baha. He says toward the end of one of the letters that as to one of your other questions, it will be answered for you in a dream. He puts that in the letter. So there are lots of ways the permission of God to understand something is given to us. All right, so it's almost midnight here. So let's see if we can, Sarush, can you read the next 2, please?
O affectionate seeker, shouldst thou soar in the holy realm of the Spirit, thou wouldst recognize God manifest and exalted above all things, in such wise that thine eyes would behold none else but him. God was alone, there was none else besides him. So lofty is this station, that no testimony can bear it witness, neither evidence do justice to its truth. Wert thou to explore the sacred domain of truth, thou wilt find that all things are known only by the light of his recognition, that he hath ever been and will continue forever to be known through himself. And if thou dwellest in the land of testimony, content thyself with that which he himself hath revealed. Is it not enough for them that we have sent down unto thee the book? This is the testimony which he himself hath ordained. Greater proof than this there is none, nor ever will be. This proof is his word, his own self, the testimony of his truth. And now we beseech the people of the Bayan, all the learned, the sages, the divines, and witnesses amongst them, not to forget the wishes and admonitions revealed in their book. Let them at all times fix their gaze upon the essentials of his cause, lest when he who is the quintessence of truth, the inmost reality of all things, the source of all light, is made manifest, they cling unto certain passages of the book, and inflict upon him that which was inflicted in the dispensation of the Quran. For verily, powerful is he, the King of divine might, to extinguish with one letter of his wondrous words the breath of life in the whole of the Bayan, and the people thereof, and with one letter bestow upon them a new and everlasting life, and cause them to arise and speed out of the sepulchres of their vain and selfish desires.
Can you get this last one, please?
Take heed and be watchful, and remember that all things have their consummation in belief in him, in attainment unto his day, and in the realization of his divine presence. There is no piety in turning your faces toward the east or toward the west, but he is pious who believeth in God and the last day. Give ear, O people of the Bayan, unto the truth whereunto we have admonished you, that haply ye may seek the shelter of the shadow extended in the day of God upon all mankind.
So any thoughts upon what Sarush just read? Is it not enough for them that we have sent down unto thee the book? This proof is his word, his own self, the testimony of his truth. So it's the book of God that we use as our standard.
I'm thinking a little bit about, like, here Baha'u'llah is affirming, I guess, the accuracy of the Quran.
Right.
He's quoting the Quran verbatim,
Mhm.
and he's also, he's saying this is the testimony which he hath ordained, or these are some of the examples of evidence, and he's using the Quran, as evidence.
Right.
And I'm thinking about, like, the fact that the Quran is affirmed in the Baha'i writings as, verbatim, it's correct, and the fact that there is such a distinction we make in order to protect the writings, and basically differentiate. I'm sure the books by Marzieh Gale that you were talking about would fall into the into the category of Pilgrim's Notes, right?
Exactly.
And there's this clear distinction between what is the writings which has been authenticated, like the Iran, and there's always we always kind of I can't think of the right word, but we like differentiate between the writings and then what has not been necessarily I guess approved, or
Right.
verified. So I think this is really important, and that's what I was thinking about while we were reading this, the fact that the Quran has been kind of reaffirmed, and the actually it's talking about the book itself being proof of the word of God, being sufficient testimony, and so on and so forth.
You're exactly right. But then this last sentence on this verse, this proof is his word, his own self, the testimony of his truth. So in the case of Jesus, for example, the words we have are what someone else recorded. Of course, the same is also true with Muhammad, because Muhammad was also illiterate. But his own self, his own teachings, the testimony, his own testimony, his words, and the books we have been given, the Quran, the Gospels, and the Pentateuch, are based on the verbal teachings of manifestations of God, right? But they are being affirmed by Baha'u'llah, these books. What's now different with the Bab and Baha'u'llah is now we have it in their own handwriting. And so then Baha'u'llah also goes on, and now he goes and addresses at the very end the Babis, and tells them not to fall into the same traps that all the previous followers of messengers of God did when the next manifestation came. And he's talking, of course, about himself, but he doesn't say that to the uncle. He's talking about him whom God shall make manifest. He says, for verily powerful is he, the king of divine might, to extinguish with one letter of his wondrous words the breath of life in the whole of the Bayan and the people thereof, and with one letter bestow upon them a new and everlasting light, and cause them to arise and speed out of the sepulchres of their vain and selfish desires. So he's saying that the teachings of the Bab can be completely, God has the power not only to affirm the Bab's teachings, but to completely modify them with the next person coming. And that the followers of the Bab need to not persecute the next manifestation of God in the same way that the Bab and all the previous manifestations were persecuted. And then he says, take heed and be watchful. Remember, this is the Baghdad years. Baha'u'llah has not announced his mission. Take heed and be watchful, and remember that all things have their consummation in belief in him, and attainment unto his day, and in the realization of his divine presence. Remember, Jesus said that the next one coming would come like a thief in the night. So take heed and be watchful. Give ear, O people of the Bayan, unto the truth, whereunto we have admonished you, that happily ye may seek the shelter of the shadow extended in the day of God upon all mankind. So hopefully you will seek the shelter of the shadow extended in the day of God upon all mankind. He's talking about his own revelation, which is about to be manifested. At least this is my understanding of these words. Anyone have any contrary thoughts or additions, questions? Very rich material, isn't it? An hour of this is a lot. Shireen, did you have something?
Yeah, I was gonna say, I think part of this, like your comment or what you said before about how, like each manifestation has the ability to affirm or change, like the laws of God, like it has that ability. And in one way, my understanding of always, like, even in terms of teaching the Baha'i faith, I would always say, you know, spiritual teachings are the same, but social teachings have changed as like progressive revelation, and things that made sense like thousands of years ago don't necessarily apply to society now. And like we see that in so many things, right? Where it's like, yeah, thousands of years ago, it was more sanitary to keep kosher for like health reasons and all these other things, right?
Right.
But now as society has changed, that law doesn't have to be there. And same thing with like even the advancement of women, like Islam, like for some people now view Islam as like not that progressive towards women, but for the time that which it came, it was very progressive
Right.
for how women were treated from that time period. And like to go from where to where, what was the things that had to happen, where like not the compromises, but like it's like, okay, instead of burying the women into the ground because you're so like unable to have like any concept of a woman or to see her, like, okay, she can be veiled
Right.
and be still in the
Right.
presence in the home, right? Like from where to where they had to come to give rights to women in some way, which is now looking back like so behind, I guess. And then I think of that even like just even the things we talked about, like the LGBTQ or women on the Universal House of Justice or all these other things too. I think like I think that also applies, where maybe we don't have the wisdom for why these laws are the way they are right now, but maybe for whatever reason, like that is what needs to happen to bring world unity, or from to where people are with gay people or whatever it is, whatever the issue is that you want to bring, that's like controversial or like doesn't make complete sense. And then who knows what it'll look like in another thousands of years from
Right.
that standpoint.
I don't know
I
about
just thought that like it was just a thing in my mind I was thinking about from that standpoint.
yeah. I don't know about you, but I'm glad that Baha'u'llah didn't affirm the ban on eating onions. Also, apparently the Bab also prohibited marriage with non-believers. And Baha'u'llah, of course, did not affirm